It was a day where the sun was shining, the birds were singing happily, and the trees were flaunting the newfound vernal fashion. As I walked, after every couple of steps I did a little skip. There was a wonderful music that reverberated throughout the leaves when the wind blew and the birds sang along with it. It all played in time to a beat that only I, for whatever reason, was able to hear. All passers-by seemed to ignore the music that surrounded them, their eyes beard glazed and empty as their minds were far away, treading water in a sea of thoughts. I of course did not care and was far too ecstatic about this splendid orchestra, so much so that I bellowed out a bass heavy hum to join in. I paid scant attention to the scared faces that veered as far away from me as they politely could. I was in Chorlton Park, one of many in Manchester. As much as such grounds are a mutilated face of nature, they are places that I adore, as they still give me a taste of that which I so love. I carried on with my merry stroll down into the adjacent Kenworthy woods. Eventually I reached a hidden corner that was mostly away from the public gaze. This sanctuary was conveniently protected by large rhododendron bushes, all of which I had planted, fostered and grown to hide a lovely garden of flowers that I had looked after since they were seedlings. I dropped onto my belly and shoved my rucksack underneath the rhododendrons and crawled beneath the growth. I was immediately embraced by a wonderfully comforting floral smell. A steadfast and proud buddleia was the first to greet me. Its large purple tendrils were alive with hungry bumblebees and flowers that waved their hellos in a light breeze. I carried on my careful walk along the little pathway I had previously made. Next to give their greetings were a lively group of orange geraniums who happily coaxed many a bombus, lapitaris and butterfly to pollinate them. Classy dahlias and white followed. As polite as they were in their appearance, they were provocative enough for bees to find irresistible. When I reached the middle of a little grove, I became surrounded by near luminous pink and bright violet pensimons that tried to hide their garish nature by drooping shyly. Of course, the bees were not put off by such an act. I flopped down in a little clearing in the middle of this orgy of wildlife and purred whilst enjoying the music that was all around me. It was perhaps an hour before I perked up out of my tranquil state, feeling I had let myself enjoy such leisure for too long. I remembered that another hidden alcove of mine required pruning and tending, as it was filled with different seasons' flowerage. Reluctantly I pushed myself up onto my feet, grabbed my rucksack, and set off to a different park where this other den lay hidden. I was a minute out of Kenworthy Woods and back in Chorlton Park when I came across a heinous act that required my immediate intervention. What I saw was a pit bull terrier of a young man nonchalantly throwing his chocolate bar wrapper into a bed of flowers. The music that I heard all around me screeched to a halt. As the wrapper floated to the ground, my jaw clenched. Veins on my forehead and neck bulged. My breath became deep and heavy. And soon all I could see was this young man and nothing else. He was very much for red and I was the bull. The young man moved with an aggressive swagger. He was not the daintiest of creatures, and he was certainly taller than me, with a large, muscular 6-foot frame. This macho front was paired with a peculiar fashion. He wore a tight black and floral short-sleeved shirt that appeared a couple sizes too small. He also wore a pair of white jeans that clung lecherously to his muscle-bound legs. All his prominent and protruding muscles begged for attention like a neglected child. He had a carefully sculpted crew-cut hairstyle and he clearly enjoyed the sunbed, to the point where he was a walking advertisement of how to catch melanoma. I would not hesitate to say that it was quite fortunate for a young chap that I actually saw him commit the heinous act, as if I had not, the brain cells in his head would have continued to sign off approval for such churlishness. His wrongdoer's behaviour would have then remained and undoubtedly would have contaminated others to follow this terrible path. One day, this chap would eventually fill some other just as deplorable life form's belly with his seed. Then another creature like him would be born, taking on his deplorable ways, and a terrible cycle would repeat on and on until the whole world was nothing but a cesspit. Perhaps it is quite a big leap to make such an assumption, but I was not willing to take that chance with non-intervention. As the young man walked off, I quickly looked around to see if there were any witnesses, and fortunately there were none. I was fairly sure that the young man had not noticed me hidden in the trees, which were a good 40 metres away. I took off my trench coat and left my rucksack, as they were the most identifiable items I had on. I pulled out my balaclava, put it on, and then sprinted after the offending creature from behind. When I was about a couple of metres from him, I jumped and rugby tackled him right in the arch of his lower back. The young chap let out a high-pitched squeal as I lifted him into the air and slammed him onto the ground. I was quickly on top of a winded man and had him pinned down. I thought I was going to have to do a ground and pound to tame this aggressive beast, when I noticed that his face was crinkled up in pain and tears liberally leaking down both the sides of his chiseled jaw. Please don't hurt me. Please take all my money, but just don't hurt me, he whimpered. The crying came as such a surprise that I was at a loss about what to do. Punching someone so pathetic almost seemed inhumane, so I thought perhaps a good couple of slaps would be more appropriate. The first slap caused the young chap to cry and whimper even more. It wasn't until about the fifth slap that the sobbing had started to go the opposite way and diminish. After a good 8 slaps, the young man had simmered down to soft whimpers. I jumped off the young fellow, then quickly curled up into a fetal position. Money isn't why I did this, I tried saying, but before I could carry on, the young man interrupted me by bursting into tears again. Oh God, no! Please don't rape me, he wailed loudly. The young man then made an intermittent squealing noise in between each sob. If he could have seen under my balaclava, he would have seen a raised eyebrow. All this crying made the whole ordeal unnecessarily awkward. Sorry, young man, rape really is not my cup of tea, I sighed. The young man momentarily stopped his whimpering, but then broke out into a flood of tears again. No, I don't want to die, he wailed. I'm not here to kill you either, I snapped at him. I really had to speed this lesson up, as all the possible joy of a fight had been bled out by this cretin. If you try to run away, I'll break both your legs. Now get up, I ordered. I gave him a swift, hard boot up his behind to hurry him up. The young chap staggered to his feet, his head face downwards and his lips quivering like a reprimanded child. Move, I said as I shoved him forward. The young man complied and lumbered forward with his slumped shoulders, swaying slowly from side to side. An occasional shove was required to herd him in the right direction. When he reached the wrapper, I told him to stop and then pointed out an offending item that was crudely stuck in a bed of innocent gurwots. Rather than waste both our time with a lecture, I'll make it clear that if I ever see you litter again, you will suffer in the most terrible of ways, I hissed. Although the young fellow was too petrified to bring his now pale face look into mine, I could tell he was rather confused. Now pick it up and throw it away properly, I ordered. He hesitated at first, but another swift boot cajoled him onto the righteous path. The young man picked up the wrapper and threw it in the bin that was but 3 metres away. He then obediently came back to me and stood still with his eyes cast down to my boots as he was waited for further instruction. Now piss off, I snarled. The young chap didn't wait a second to comply with my order. He bolted off and was soon out of sight. As much of a chore as that ordeal was, I did let myself enjoy the following feeling of pride that had bumped up my chest. I sauntered thinking that I had scared the young man to such a degree that just the very thought of littering would bring back traumatic memories that would convince him to act otherwise in future. Alas, my pride soon evaporated as reality became glaringly obvious. Far bigger acts of altruism were needed to make a noticeable difference in this world. But before such black clouds in my mind could make me morose, they were blown away by the realization I was soon to take my first meaningful steps into vigilantism. I soon realised that the young man might have alerted the authorities, so I decided to leave my garden in South Manchester for another day. I picked up my few belongings and headed towards one of my favourite alcoves in Heaton Park. This being in North Manchester, but before this plan could progress, it was rudely interrupted by a very petulant and vocal stomach. It seemed a picnic was in order, so I swung by my humble abode and picked up what leftover food I had. I was then off on my merry way. After a casual jog, I nearly reached my spot, but I had to navigate past a portly couple having a picnic themselves. They didn't notice me as I walked by, as they were too busy playing with each other's tongues while shoveling sharp bought swill into their mouths at the same time. Sodden, half-chewed boulders of food tumbled down and down onto the ground all around them. I carried on, keen to get away from the vulgar sight. My alcove was nicely tucked away and hidden by a small half-ring of hedges and metal fencing. A friendly giant of an oak tree stood on guard near the entrance to this little nook. I'd spent many an hour reading, sleeping, eating, meditating, and procrastinating there. It was a lovely little getaway, priced at the reasonable cost of a small walk. I fell to the ground and let out a sigh of pleasure as my head touched the soft grass. It was only a couple of minutes until my stomach loudly and incessantly pined, as it thought I had forgotten it. I quickly pushed myself up and pulled out an assortment of leftover goodies from my rucksack. It was not a planned meal, so these scarce leftovers had to make do with each other. First came 2 tinfoil-covered whole roast ducks. Both birds had been given a citrus marinade and were left over from the previous night. From a brown paper bag came a sourdough loaf I had baked earlier that morning. I then pulled out some little plastic lunch boxes, all filled with leftovers from different meals. The smell of roast vegetables painted with garlic filled my nostrils when I opened one of these tubs. For my dessert there was a plastic tub filled with a delectable panna cotta laid with passion fruit jelly. Then to top it all off there was an assortment of cheese and crackers. One of the cheeses, a camembert, was so runny I damn near thought it was alive. Each time I turned my head it tried to silently creep up my cracker to get away. I showed it no mercy. I ripped into the food fervently with my hands and teeth until there were only crumbs and duck carcasses left. I then fastidiously sucked any remaining meat and cartilage off the bones, licked the plastic containers clean, and pulled out the final chapter of my meal, a flask of English breakfast tea. After I finished the divine nectar, I slowly fell backwards onto the floor with a satisfied smile lazily stretched out on my face. A thunderous belch rushed out my mouth to tell the world my contentment. I then closed my eyes to snooze as the sun's rays warmed me. It must have been at least an hour before I awoke to the feeling of cold rain pattering down on my face and my clothes. Manchester's weather was unfortunately severely bipolar. I opened my eyes and saw that the sun had been chased away by a mob of angry grey clouds. As I was not one to let the weather dampen my spirits, I got up to go for a stroll. During my walk, Manchester's weather went through another change of mood, and the sun came back swinging, chasing away the fleeing grey clouds. I soon came across a friendly oak tree that stood with a few of its kind in a field, and slumped myself down underneath it. As I sat back and took in the scenery, I spotted a grey squirrel who scurried down a tree to find food. It soon found some sort of morsel and sat down on its hind legs to munch away. I leapt onto my feet and started shouting at the critter. "Bah! Bah! Bah! You bah!" The squirrel simply ignored the racket I made. "Hey, you boring little git!" I shouted again. This time the little critter turned its head to look back at me. I broke out into an uproarious laughter. Ah! 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 The squirrel clearly was not amused and went back to eating its food. When it turned away, I sprinted at it whilst making rasping noises. The squirrel dashed off before I could reach it, and soon found a high tree branch. The critter then rained down a stream of angry squeaks at me. I didn't have any intention of catching the creature, I was just playing with it, so instead of taking offence at its anger, I fell to the ground laughing. When I finally reined in my mirth, I noticed a family of 4 hurriedly walking away from me. The parents didn't even bother answering the children's question about whether they could go and play with a strange, funny man and the squirrels. There was something about grey squirrels that brought out the desire to be obnoxious to them. Perhaps it was because the little fellows had unwittingly caused the near extinction of their red-coloured brethren, so I felt they all needed a good ribbon. Whatever the reason, I often chased, shouted and laughed at the fuzzy-tailed rodents until they themselves were red in the face with rage. On this occasion it was an hour before I became bored. I had a look at where the sun was in the sky and figured that it would still be a fair few hours until my main course of amusement came. Suddenly my stomach strutted into my mind and made it obvious with a few rumbles that it wanted food again. I felt in my pockets to find a few pounds worth of change. That small amount of money would not get me the type of culinary delights that the organ was accustomed to. Money, food, and then fun, I mumbled to myself, as I went off to acquire a few more coins from a hapless Mancunian or two.